Hi, third graders. I'm changing things up a little bit for reading instruction. I still want you to read independently on Epic or in your independent book, but I'm also going to do a read aloud, which I want you to start noticing character traits in. So there's going to be a Google Slides presentation that's added to after this video, and I want you to be looking at the character traits. There's a list of them on the video, and I want you to think about the different characters that we're going to meet in our book. We're going to be reading Because of Winn Dixie. This is a book that third graders read every year, and I thought it was important for you to also be a part of this book and to be looking for character traits for the different characters that are in the book. The first main character you're going to meet is Opal, and you're also going to meet Winn Dixie, which is her dog. And you're going to meet the preacher, which is Opal's father, and then Gloria Dump, who is a lady who Opal ends up confiding in and going to and talking to a lot and becoming very good friends with. So those are the four main characters that I would like you to be paying attention to different character traits. What kind of person is this character? Are they a kind person? Are they someone who is helpful? Are they mischievous? Look at the list that is included. Try to pick out one or two character traits that you're noticing about each character, and then how do you know that? What from the story tells you that character is, that character trait embodies that character? And there's a little bit of a writing part under with each character that you're going to be just kind of naming the character trait, and then how do you know? What is the evidence from the text that tells you that this character is this kind of a person? And characters can change and evolve over the course of the story, so you may be adding extras to those characters. So that way, if you need to keep adding, you most certainly can. So everybody will have their own Google Slide presentation or Google Slide, so that way I can keep checking on it and seeing how you're developing your characters, seeing what kind of character traits you're noticing that your character, all the characters are, embodying throughout the story. So Because of Winn Dixie by Kate DiCamillo, and this book is a wonderful book. I'm actually really excited that I'm going to get to read it. I don't normally get to read it in fourth grade because usually you read it in third, so I'm really excited to share this book with you. So, Chapter 1. My name is India Opal Bologna, and last summer my daddy, the preacher, sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice, and 2 tomatoes, and I came back with a dog. This is what happened. I walked into the produce section of the Winn Dixie grocery store to pick out my 2 tomatoes, and I almost bumped right into the store manager. He was standing there all red-faced and screaming and waving his arms all around. "Who let a dog in here?" he kept on shouting. "Who let a dirty dog in here?" At first, I didn't see a dog. There were just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor, tomatoes and onions and green peppers. And there was what seemed like a whole army of Winn Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same as the store manager was waving his. And then the dog came running around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly, and he looked like he was having a real good time. His tongue was hanging out and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and he smiled right at me. I had never before in my life seen a dog smile, but that is what he did. He pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth, and then he wagged his tail so hard that he knocked some oranges off a display, and they went rolling everywhere, mixing in with the tomatoes and onions and green peppers. The manager screamed, "Somebody grab that dog!" The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs, and you could tell that all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time that he was having in the produce department. But somehow he ended up knocking the manager over. And the manager must have been having a bad day, because lying there on the floor, right in front of everyone, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him, real concerned, and licked his face. "Please," said the manager, "somebody call the pound." "Wait a minute," I hollered. "That's my dog. Don't call the pound." All the Winn Dixie employees turned around and looked at me, and I knew I had done something big. And maybe stupid too, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't let the dog go to the pound. Here, boy, I said. The dog stopped licking the manager's face and put his ears up in the air and looked at me like he was trying to remember where he knew me from. Here, boy, I said again, and then I figured that the dog was probably just like everybody else in the world, that he would want to get called by a name. Only I didn't know what his name was, so I just said the first thing that came into my head. I said, "Here, Winn Dixie." And the dog came trotting over to me just like he had been doing it his whole life. The manager sat up and gave me a hard stare, like maybe I was making fun of him. "It's his name." I said, "Honest." The manager said, "Don't you know not to bring a dog into a grocery store?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "He got in by mistake. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "Come on, Winn Dixie," I said to the dog. I started walking, and he followed right along behind me as I went out of the produce department, down the cereal aisle, and past all the cashiers, and out the door. Once we were safe outside, I checked him over real careful, and he didn't look that good. He was big but skinny, and you could see his ribs. And there were bald patches all over in places where he didn't have any fur at all. Mostly, he looked like a big piece of old brown carpet that had been left out in the rain. "You're a mess," I told him. "I bet you don't belong to anybody." He smiled at me. He did that thing again where he pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth. He smiled so big that it made him sneeze. It was like he was saying, "I know I'm a mess. Isn't it funny?" It's hard not to immediately fall in love with a dog who has a good sense of humor. "Come on," I told him. "Let's see what the preacher has to say about you." And the two of us, me and Winn Dixie, started walking home. Chapter 2. That summer I found Winn Dixie was also the summer me and the preacher moved to Naomi, Florida, so he could be the new preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. My daddy's a good preacher and a nice man, but sometimes it's hard for me to think about him as my daddy because he spends so much time preaching or thinking about preaching or getting ready to preach. And so in my mind, I think of him as the preacher. Before I was born, he was a missionary in India, and that's how I got my first name. But he calls me by my second name, Opal, because that was his mother's name, and he loved her a lot. Anyway, while me and Winn Dixie walked home, I told him how I got my name, and I told him how I had just moved to Naomi. I also told him about the preacher and how he was a good man, even if he was too distracted with sermons and prayers and suffering people to go grocery shopping. "But you know what?" I told Winn Dixie. "You're a suffering dog, so maybe he'll take to you right away. Maybe he'll let me keep you." Winn Dixie looked up to me and wagged his tail. He was kind of limping, like something was wrong with one of his legs, and I had to admit, he stunk. He was an ugly dog, but already I loved him with all my heart. When we got to the Friendly Corners trailer park, I told Winn Dixie that he had to behave right and be quiet, because this was an all-adult trailer park, and the only reason I got to live in it was because the preacher was a preacher, and I was a good, quiet kid. I was what the Friendly Corners trailer park manager, Mr. Alfred, called an exception. And I told Winn Dixie he had to act like an exception, too. Specifically, I told him not to pick any fights with Mr. Alfred's cats or Mrs. Detweller's little yappy Yorkie dog, Samuel. Winn Dixie looked up at me while I was telling him everything, and I swear he understood. "Sit," I told him when we got to my trailer. He sat right down. He had good manners. "Stay here," I told him. "I'll be right back." The preacher was sitting in the living room working at the little fold-out table. He had papers spread all around him, and he was rubbing his nose, which always meant he was thinking really hard. "Daddy," I said. He said back. "Daddy, do you know how you always tell me that we should help those less fortunate than ourselves?" He said, and he was rubbing his nose, looking around at his papers. So it sounds like he's distracted, right? Is he really listening to Opal? Not really. "Well," I said, "I found a less fortunate at the grocery store." "Is that right?" he said. "Yes, sir," I told him. I stared at the preacher really hard. Sometimes he reminded me of a turtle hiding inside his shell, in there thinking about things and not ever sticking his head out into the world. "Daddy, I was wondering, could this less fortunate, could he stay with us for a while?" Finally, the preacher looked up at me. "Opal," he said, "what are you talking about?" "I found a dog," I told him, "and I want to keep him." "No dogs," the preacher said. "We've talked about this before. You don't need a dog." I know it, I said. I know I don't need a dog. But this dog needs me. Look, I said. I went to the trailer door and I hollered, Winn Dixie! Winn Dixie's ears shot up in the air and he grinned and sneezed and then he came limping up to the steps and into the trailer and put his head right in the preacher's lap, right on top of a pile of papers. The preacher looked at Winn Dixie. He looked at his ribs and his matted up fur and the places where he was bald. The preacher's nose wrinkled up. Like I said, the dog smelled pretty bad. Winn Dixie looked up at the preacher. He pulled back his lips and showed the preacher all of his crooked yellow teeth, and he wagged his tail and knocked some of the preacher's papers off the table. Then he sneezed and some more papers fluttered to the floor. What did you call this dog? The preacher asked. Winn Dixie, I whispered. I was afraid to say anything too loud. I could see that Winn Dixie was having a good effect on the preacher. He was making him poke his head out of his shell. Well, said the preacher, he's a stray if I've ever seen one. He put down his pencil and scratched Winn Dixie behind the ears, and a less fortunate too, that's for sure. Are you looking for a home? The preacher asked real soft to Winn Dixie. Winn Dixie wagged his tail. Well, the preacher said, I guess you found one. So I'm going to stop there at chapter 2. I'm sure you found a few things that maybe popped out to you about the characters so far, about Opal and the preacher, Opal's father, and maybe even Winn Dixie. So if you found some character traits that you think, or a character trait that you think kind of describes each one of them, go into the Google slide presentation, find the character, and then type in the trait that you found, and then why, where, or what evidence, what from the book makes you say that that character trait fits that character. What specifically did they do or say, or what action or what were they thinking, or how did that tell you that that character trait fit that character? Okay, and I will be back again. I'm going to read a couple chapters every day, so you won't get this posted at the beginning of the week and be due at the end of the week. I'm going to post every day a couple of chapters, so that way you'll have some to listen to every single day. So make sure you check back onto the Google Classroom so that way you can get the next installment of our book, Because of Winn Dixie. All right, I will see you guys soon. Bye.